Outlaws is one of those games that very few people have heard of and even less have actually played.
Who did this?
They've taken Sarah. You gotta sell her, we'll never see her again.
Where did they go?
Oh, James.
It was made at a time when the gaming industry was moving in leaps and strides, and every new title was doing something totally original.
I'm cold. Hold me.
I'm holding you.
I love you.
Anna!
It's a first-person shooter developed by LucasArts and released in 1997 for the PC exclusively, at a time when Western games were practically unheard of in the FPS genre, and it is still one of the most unique games of that era. In Outlaws, you take on the role of James Anderson, a retired lawman who returns home to find his wife murdered and daughter kidnapped over nothing more than a real estate deal. Naturally, he's pretty pissed off, so he sets off to kill those responsible and save his daughter. The story is the apex of Western tropes, and they don't come more formulaic than this. But then again, that's kind of the whole point, with story elements taken from films like Once Upon a Time in the West, among many others. James doesn't go around spouting off one-liners every time he blows someone away, but they still made him seem suitably badass throughout the cutscenes. It's probably worth mentioning that the music in particular is pretty much a goddamn masterpiece and comes off as some sort of love letter to Ennio Morricone's scores from the spaghetti western films of the 1960s. Combined with fully animated cutscenes between missions that have a lot of cinematic flair, it really puts Outlaws in a league of its own, and even to this day, nothing has ever been done quite like it. Outlaws runs on LucasArts' proprietary Jedi Engine, previously used in Dark Forces. The Jedi Engine was never much of a visual powerhouse, even for its time, but it does offer up some really varied levels, ranging from small frontier towns to large expansive canyons complete with waterfalls and sunken caves. It's also able to handle having a lot of stuff going on at any one time without taking a hit in performance, which is pretty admirable. Gameplay itself isn't terribly complex, it's a 90s shooter first and foremost. You go from level to level killing hordes of bad guys with a revolver, rifle and shotguns, opening locked doors with keys, and keeping yourself alive with health items. Enemy variety is pretty basic, the only difference between them usually being what type of gun they have and how fast they're able to kill you. Every level has a boss that you usually have to kill to end the mission, often accompanied by a clip of them saying some parting words.
Good shooting, mister, but you're already too late.
It's a hard game as you'd expect, and you'll probably die a fair bit. I have noticed that the damage taken seems to be nothing more than a roll of the dice, and strafing around and the distance you are from enemies doesn't seem to change that too much. Obviously, if you're closer, you're going to take a lot more damage, but even when you're 100 yards away, it seems a single hit can knock off a lot of health points. Sudden deaths are quite common because of this, even from the weakest of enemy types. Taking any of the bosses on directly, for instance, is basically suicide, and you have to cheat them out and peek from around corners to take potshots at them until they go down, which is a little crappy. There were a few moments when I just got annihilated without even being able to see who was shooting at me. But for the most part, the shooting is handled pretty well.
Where are you, Marshal?
Fanning the revolver and gunning a bunch of guys down in quick succession never gets old, and there's even a few areas where you can put a rifle and scope to good use in some of the game's larger environments. The only weapon that flat out doesn't work is the dynamite sticks. The physics just aren't handled right, and it never controls how you expect it to.
Come and get it.
After you finish the single player, which will roughly take 6 to 8 hours to complete, there's also a few so-called historical missions to play through. The only one worth mentioning is the Marshal training mission, which lets you hunt down a series of outlaws one by one and either kill or capture them for points. This could almost be a game in and of itself, and also gives you access to the game's best Easter eggs, you know, if you're into that kind of thing. Unfortunately, Outlaws is an absolute asshole to get running properly. Out of all the old games I've reviewed so far, it's definitely the worst. I had to emulate Windows XP just to get the damn thing to install, then patch it 3 or 4 times so it was even remotely playable, and it was still full of errors and bugs. Only people who are already fans of the game are really going to be bothered messing around with this kind of stuff. Whether or not everyone else believes it's worth it just to get a game working they may or may not enjoy is really up to them. It's a real shame that no one has tried to tidy it up and release it for modern systems like what's been done with Duke Nukem and Shadow Warrior, because it really is a unique and enjoyable gem from a time when LucasArts were consistently making some really solid titles, and it's a game that's had a lot of love put into it. Getting a high definition overhaul would really do the game a lot of favours, considering the art style and music in particular are still fantastic. They did it with the Monkey Island game, so I'm sure there'd be a market for Outlaws as well. amongst all the FPS fans I've spoken to over the years, most people seem to agree that Outlaws is one of the most memorable games of its time, especially among other westerns. It didn't make a huge splash like Doom or Duke Nukem 3D, it just kind of came and went without that much of a fuss, but those people who were fortunate enough to play it will tell you just how good it really was.